Hello and welcome everybody to College Football Corner. Alongside Jersey Joe Archino, I'm Anthony Carlo. Now the championships are just around the corner, and first we'll be getting into FSU and their win over Florida and Alabama and their win over Auburn. And then a little bit later on we'll be discussing those championship games. But first, Joe, Alabama, a win in a complete offensive shootout between Auburn, the number 15 team, and Alabama and Blake Sims. Blake Sims has been a clutch quarterback. Get the win again, but the key in this one, not Blake Sims. It was Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's 3 touchdowns leads Alabama to a victory. What else did you see from this game, Joe?
Well, look, there's a reason that Auburn's defensive coordinator, Ellis Johnson, was fired yesterday in that game. Just some inexcusable coverages. I mean, you give Blake Sims and Amari Cooper a ton of credit. They were just clicking on the same page, and it was really night and day. Blake Sims, 3 interceptions in the first half, really struggled. Alabama, the one thing you really see with their defense is, you know how good Kirby Smart is, you know how good Nick Saban is, but their defense has struggled against up-tempo offenses. Auburn's offense, the last 2 Iron Bowls, has really moved the ball against them, but this year, Alabama has something they had not had to this point, a very explosive offense. You give Blake Sims credit because, like Anthony Carlos said, he has not been always pretty, but when you've needed it, he's been a money quarterback. And in the second half of this game, he was money, right on the same page with Amari Cooper, and they're the big reason why they were able to pull out this explosive win against the Auburn Tigers.
Joe, a 55-44 win, and we mentioned how this was a complete, offensive slugfest, if you will. But let's talk about the ability to defeat a quarterback like Nick Marshall, who set a school record throwing for 456 yards. I mean, that's a feat in itself.
It is. I mean, Nick Marshall is one of the most dynamic players in college football. A guy who's really expanded his skill set to be progressive in both the passing and running. He's a dual-threat quarterback, and against a defense like Alabama, it gave them a lot of problems, but you saw in that game really stepping up on offense because we've seen in the past Alabama's MO has been all you really need is a game-managing type quarterback. A.J. McCarron, Greg McElroy, these were guys who really relied heavily on the running game and the defense. But now you're seeing kind of the SEC is changing a little bit in that regard. It's becoming more of a league where you need to be able to score points and score points quickly. Alabama in that game really needed an offensive explosion to counter the Auburn Tigers, and that's exactly what they did. Blake Sims is a quarterback Alabama hasn't had in a long time, and it's not always pretty like we keep on reiterating, but when you need those points from him, he gets it done. It's going to be very interesting when we get to the playoffs because if a team like Alabama faced off against an up-tempo quarterback like Marcus Mariota, who runs an up-tempo offense like no one else, that would be a heck of a matchup to watch out for.
Well, FSU and their victory over Florida was a heck of a matchup to watch between these two teams. FSU winds up with the 24-19 victory in Will Muschamp's last game as head coach of the Florida Gators. But in this game, speaking about all year long like we have, Joe, grinding out wins. Now the Florida State Seminoles, they're undefeated in 2 consecutive regular seasons, and Jameis Winston, if there's ever been a game that he's grinded out, it was this one. 4 interceptions he throws, 3 in the first quarter. Joe, how did FSU pull out the win in this one?
I mean, it's just been game after game, we've come back with the same exact story. Florida State pulls out another one, and you give Florida a lot of credit here because they really had nothing to play for in this game. Will Muschamp's last game, but defensively, they're always bringing a very sound product to the table, and they gave Florida State a lot of problems. The thing about Jameis Winston is the guy hasn't been great, especially in the first half. Florida State's big problem this year is they've really come out of the gate extremely slow. No energy, not a lot of rhythm to their offense at all. They've really had to string together some momentum in the second half. That was the case again in this game. Jameis Winston, the 3 picks early in the first quarter. Then he settled down a little bit, made the plays when they had to. But it's so dangerous to play this way because when you start playing these better teams, let's be honest, Florida State, for the most part, their regular season schedule was cake. a couple of interesting games between Notre Dame and even Florida. But when they start playing the Georgia Techs, if they play a team in the playoff like an Oregon or an Alabama, they're not going to be able to come out of the gate slow like that. Because we see in some of these games, you're going to need to put together consistent plays, consistent drives, or you're in big trouble. So Florida State has got to wake up now, because Georgia Tech, we'll get to in a minute, that is going to present a lot of problems to them.
That's right, and Dalvin Cook taking the offensive load in that game, rushing for a career-high 144 yards. I did mention it was a good matchup, not for the fact that, let's say, the teams were evenly matched, but for the fact that you would figure that Florida would be playing for a lot in Will Muschamp's last game. Very emotional game for them. After the game, had mentioned there were a lot of tears in the locker room, a lot of hugs. Let's get on to those championship games, and let's begin with the Pac-12 matchup, which features the Oregon Ducks, who are being led by their Superman, if you will, and their Heisman Trophy contender, Marcus Mariota. And Marcus Mariota will be testing himself against, if you will, his kryptonite. The Arizona Wildcats are the only team who handed the Oregon Ducks their only loss this year. Where do we go with this one, Joe?
And the thing that makes that loss to Arizona even more impressive was Arizona beat them in Eugene, Oregon, a place that Oregon is always very, very solid and sound in. So Rich Rodriguez, head coach of Arizona, he has done a marvelous job. This team is for real. They're a legit team. Beating Arizona State rivalry week, very impressive win again. Offensively, they can do it all. But I think you look at Oregon, and they had that bye 2 weeks ago so they could rest up. The major thing I look at is a couple weeks ago when they lost to Arizona, they had major losses on the offensive line, a lot of key pieces out. Those pieces are back. They're still not perfect on the offensive line, but they're much better than they were when they lost to Arizona. That fact alone should help. And Marcus Mariota, I mean, like you were saying, he's Superman. The guy has been unbelievable this year. In this game against Oregon State in the Civil War, 6 touchdowns, 4 passing, 2 on the ground. The guy just does it all. He's going to keep them in this game. I think Oregon is in business the rest of the way. They will get a win in the Pac-12 champ game.
Well, moving on to the SEC Championship, which features Missouri, who are going to try and test themselves against Alabama. And we spoke already about Blake Sims and Amari Cooper. We know this team can get it done. Will they be able to complete it in this championship?
I'm going to be honest. I think this game's a blowout. I think Alabama just blows the doors off of Missouri. Missouri is a team that lost to Indiana in the Big Ten. They lost to Indiana. They also lost to Georgia, 38-0. Didn't put up any points. I have no faith in Missouri. Missouri has a good defense. Gary Pinkel is a very good head coach, but I don't trust their offense one bit. Matty Mock just doesn't do anything for me at quarterback. Not a very explosive guy. Doesn't have great athleticism. Throws the deep ball okay, but I don't like Matty Mock. I think Alabama runs over Missouri. I think it'll be a very, very easy win for them.
And moving on to the ACC Championship, we spoke about FSU and their win, icing themselves into that ACC Championship. Now to face off in a matchup that features Jameis Winston trying to get yet another win against Georgia Tech. Now Georgia Tech will be missing one of their key receivers in this game, as Smelter has gone down with an injury. But can Jameis Winston make this happen again? He's proved he has a short-term memory span when he picks up, or I should say when he throws a pick or whatnot. Will this be another win for FSU?
I think FSU will win this game, but Georgia Tech is a very good football team. I'm glad because a lot of people don't really pay attention to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's head coach, Paul Johnson, the last 2 years, he's had this team just as a major force. They're a very good football team. If I had to compare them to people, I would say that Auburn Tigers are a great comparison. Georgia Tech runs a very up-tempo offense. Their quarterback, Justin Thomas, is a dual-threat guy, throws the ball well, runs the ball well. He does it all. Florida State really hasn't faced a lot of guys with as good capabilities. And the big thing for Georgia Tech is they're great at controlling the time of possession. When they get the ball, they're going to hold on to it for a long time. They take their time, go down the field with the running game. They throw the ball well as well. if Florida State comes out of the gate and has problems with turnovers, and you combine that with Georgia Tech's ability to control the time of possession, that is a recipe for disaster for the Florida State Seminoles. Now, like I said before, I do think they will win, but Georgia Tech has a very, very good chance of beating them.
A lot to look forward to if you're a college football fan. Jersey Joe Archino, our college football analyst, highlighting it all for you today. But we'll be back next time to recap you on what went down in those championship games. So for Jersey Joe Archino, I'm Anthony Carlo.